time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnett Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here.
With Barnett Bain. Good moment, everyone.
Good moments.
Gorgeous day, gorgeous fall experience. The whole energy seems to shift.
It does. It's almost chilly out there for a minute or two in the morning.
Chilly and clear.
Yeah.
That's a good omen. That's auspicious. A little clarity.
Clarity is always helpful.
Absolutely auspicious.
Yes.
So little clarity about anything. And the both an opportunity and a challenge to make a friend of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So it is a pleasure to look out onto the holodeck and see clear skies and smooth seas. It's gorgeous. A moment of respite.
Yeah.
So little respite, huh?
There's a bit of turmoil.
A little bit of turmoil and
Yeah.
such a shrillness in the discourse. Certainly, I listen to what goes on. I'm not talking about our station, of course, but I'm listening. We don't have any of that on KVTA. No, but elsewhere.
Yeah.
Not pointing any fingers, not saying, I'm just saying. There is an inability to listen. We are civics challenged. We have such an inability. The juiciness of compassion has been wrung out of the culture.
Yeah.
And things are always seem to be positional, and blacks or whites, people look for safety and absolutes and guarantees. And we are, as we started, it's so increasingly obvious that we are in this time of unknowing and uncertainty, and if we cannot develop a culture of relationship, of honoring the other without being immediately triggered, or understanding that we're triggered and putting the clutch in on it.
Yeah. Listen, I'm with you. There's the nature of media is, it has become what's the quickest hook. There's not a lot of depth in the conversation, and that's challenging because we're so quick to jump on a particular new crisis or whatever. And the lack of depth, it's almost like I hear it repeated again and again, the same sort of take, dividing everything into a good or bad, right or wrong, black or white. I'm thinking right now of the bullying thing that's going on. The NFL is reflecting some bullying. There's a lot of this theme, which I know is close and dear to you, Barnett, as well as me. It's a big theme of how do we respond?
Yes, I'm very committed to bullying.
No, I don't mean that. I mean to looking at it from a deep and wide perspective, to getting underneath it.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing for me is really when I own what's coming up in this collective mirror, this big mirror of what media is reflecting back. How do I own it personally? How do I deal with it personally? How do I personalize what's being reflected?
Well, let's move beyond media for a second. Marshall McLuhan famously said, understood so many years, decades before the rest of us, that the medium is the message. And we have to find leaders, visionaries that can transcend that. And we need to find human beings who are messengers and not media that is messages.
Yes.
So with that in mind, I want to introduce to our listeners our guest. Our guest is Marianne Williamson.
Does that need introduction besides that?
There's probably one or two people living under a rock somewhere.
Go ahead. You do it, Barnett.
Roll with me, man.
All right, I'm trying.
Marianne's had a 30-year career as a speaker, an activist, an author of books too many to list, and all of them on my shelf. One of them, Healing the Soul of America, very germane to what we're talking about. She's the founder of the nonprofit in LA called Project Angel Food, wherein I labored for several years every Thursday morning as a baker.
That's
dear
great,
to my heart.
Barnett. That's beautiful. I didn't know that.
And more and more and more and more. So I don't want to waste too much time on introductions when we have the main course coming up. Marianne Williamson, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so so much, and thank you for working for Project Angel Food. I didn't know that. How delightful. Thanks.
You never had one of my muffins?
You probably
had one of
did.
your muffins, actually.
It's so ironic because if you know Barnett, he just doesn't cook that much.
Well, he doesn't get up that early. Hasn't gotten up that early since then.
Yeah.
So we're really honored to have you with us this morning, and we're particularly honored because of the why of what you're of how you're being with us this morning and what you're doing with us this morning. You're here because you are walking your beliefs and running for the 33rd district, and up against a formidable. I'm not going to use the word opponent, but a formidable alternative. So would you share with us why?
Well, first of all, yes, I am. I'm running for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives here in California, District 33. And the why has to do with everything that you have been talking about so far. We need a politics of compassion as much as we need compassion anywhere else. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of times it's easier to seek the placement of compassion everywhere but politics. And yet, if we really seek to be conscious people, we can't be that selective. And I think a lot of times it's easy enough for us to talk about how we all need to be more compassionate, the culture needs to be more compassionate in all the ways that you were talking about before. But we all know that there are places where actually standing for that would, by definition, put us outside our comfort zone. But I think that now more than ever on the planet, the magic does lie outside our comfort zone. I think a lot of us are feeling that kind of blessed unrest that Paul Hawken described, so that so many of us, I don't know if you guys are feeling it, but I assume you are because everyone I know is.
Absolutely.
The calling to take some step that we know really would represent the next best phase of our embodiment, and yet it seems outside the normal boxes that we've become used to. And that's what I feel in my heart, and that's the place where I felt I was to put my energy. You know, it's interesting when you were talking about bullying before, and first of all, I agree with you when you were saying it's a good thing that we're talking about it. It's not like bullying didn't occur before. But one of the things, I think it was you, Barnett, who said, well, then the question becomes, how do I personalize that message? Well, I think for those of us who are seekers and, see the field of consciousness as our primary home, I think that it's time for something else. I think it's time to, in a way, depersonalize it slightly. To think not just in terms of how bullying, what does that say about me personally? I think it's time for us to ask, what about bullying when it comes to the U.S. government? What about bullying when it comes to nations? What about bullying when it comes to an economy, an economic system that is not centered around conscience and that is so quick to put aside the interests of people for the benefit of a few? That's a form of bullying. So I think it's time to take the personal message, whether it's about bullying or anything else, that we have all become pretty adept at, and say, okay, I figured out. Not that we will ever stop asking ourselves how it applies to us personally, but I think the fact that we have been asking that question for so many years means that we're the ones who could contribute so much, taking the question into a much larger field than just ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. And of course, I don't think anybody listening to this broadcast would argue that as a culture, we are quite sensitive at this point to understanding more or less the psychology of bullies and of victimizers. We are very quick to make programs and institutionalize progressive policies around understanding how victimizers are created. What's less obvious and maybe not so politically correct is that victims are created in the same way because they are exposed to an atmosphere of submission, of hopelessness, of helplessness, of being without a voice. And so bullies seek out victims. If victims are empowered, bullies have nowhere to go. Now, of course, this is a gross oversimplification, but you have been active in empowering empowering people to discover more and more of what their capacities are and can be. And I am just wondering why you think that a more doing nature at this point in your life would trump the power of your beingness. You've been so effective. And how do you propose to balance your doing with your being? I think the strength of Marianne Williamson is that she models a being state.
But, and thank you, but writing a book involves doing.
Absolutely.
Giving a lecture involves doing. Yin and yang makes yin and yang equally important. Being and doing. I think too much an unbalanced being is as serious an issue as an unbalanced doing, because it's easy to experience an unbalanced being. You just don't have to ever, do anything for anybody else. I mean, your question, I was reading a book the other day about slavery and how there were many churches at the time who actually called it God's will. How can, to me that becomes an immoral, almost obscene conversation to talk just about being when 17,000 children are starving every day.
Well, there is being with a compassionate heart. I think there's quite a few Buddhists on the planet. I'm not one of them. But there are quite a few Buddhists that would maybe argue that the being state of a compassionate understanding of suffering born out of personal experience is a state that uplifts and empowers others, that we're not here to have that kind of metaphysical conversation. But since you are moving forward...
Wait a minute. Wait, we can't let that go.
Okay,
right, so if I just sit in my apartment and I'm meditating...
No, it's more to it than that.
I really have compassion for the suffering of others. Now, don't get me wrong.
Well, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, okay, because I'm not saying that the state of being is to be diminished. And anything we do is infused with the consciousness with which we do it. So, for instance, if I were to run for political office or anything else and not do it within the grounding of the compassionate being that you're saying, then absolutely I would just be adding to the chaos.
Yeah, so this is where I'm coming from, because I actually want to jump in here. I love the idea of acting from a place of being, right? So it's not enough to conceptualize it. It has to be
both. It
has to be actualized. It has to be something that's expressed.
It has to be embodied, exactly.
Absolutely. I want to go back for a minute, because the idea that bullying stretches far and wide, and it's there's a belief structure underneath it which has to do with dominance and submission and fighting for your piece of the pie and so forth and so on. A very sort of people sometimes call it Darwinian mindset, but the whole understanding of evolution is not about this survival of the fittest where the biggest and the strongest survive, but there's another perspective where the evolution has to do with those who can adapt. And I think what's glaring, at least in my life, is how many ways my own propensity to try to dominate and control, and my propensity even to be mean, to objectify other people. I'm not proud of that, but I'm aware of it. And that's the place where my world calls for me to do some deep and profound work. And then, as you're saying, Marianne, find expression in the world for that, right?
Well, there are a lot of hours in the day.
There are a lot of hours in the day.
And I also think your point is really interesting about theories of evolution. And you're right, it is about adaptation. And you can talk about it. It reminds me of when the American War for Independence was fought, and the British Army came over here, and they were ready to fight like proper British gentlemen. And what they would do is they would stand in line, these long lines with their muskets, and in a very formal, ceremonial way, they would wait until shoot was called, or whatever it is, begin, gentlemen, and then they would begin shooting. That was the way you did war. Now, the American colonists had been around the Native American Indians, and they had learned a whole different kind of warfare having to do with ambushing. So the American colonists weren't in these straight lines. They were hiding behind trees. So in that situation, although what the British were doing represented what you were talking about before, which is the capacity to dominate and to lord over in a material sense, what the American colonists were representing was a more adaptive way of battle with their ambushing, and they're moving very quickly.
I love this for the politics because, as you're speaking, of course, my brain is going right to the sort of status quo of the political system. And it almost is like everyone's lining up and firing. And I almost see you, Marianne, with this guerrilla sort of love musket, if you will, getting in there and disrupting everything. All right, wait, before we go to that, though, because I want to talk about that piece in particular, this other way of approaching a paradigm that is set up almost like people firing at each other from a different vantage point. But before we do that, we have to take a break. So what I want to do is we'll put a pin in it, and we're going to go pay some bills. And when we get back, we'll talk more with Marianne Williamson. So stay with us here on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And we're back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. This is Barnet Bain. I'm here with Freeman Michaels and our guest, Marianne Williamson. So, Marianne, I want to ask you a question. And I'm sure this question has come up before. You are running for Henry Waxman's seat. Henry Waxman, by all accounts, is considered by many to be an exemplary public servant. I can think of a dozen less praiseworthy occupants. So why Henry Waxman?
I don't see myself as running against Henry Waxman.
Running for his seat.
Yeah, but I think it's an important distinction. It's like you were talking before about not liking the word opponent. Mm-hmm. I don't think of myself as running against Henry Waxman, but I am running for a new transformational politics within the status quo. The status quo itself, even at its best, cannot deliver us to a new transformational politics. It is transactional by its nature. That's like saying, why would you be a holistic health practitioner when we have these really good doctors out there? We need more than an allopathic politics. We need a larger holistic political conversation. I don't see that coming from either major political party right now. I don't see it coming from the status quo, and I think it's becoming increasingly illogical for us to expect a new conversation from a system that is beholden to the old one. The old conversation is based on the fact that there is a legalized system of corruption in the United States in which moneyed interests have an undue influence on the functioning of our government.
Certainly.
Now, neither major political party is taking the kind of stand for changing that that needs to be made because of what I just said. They both need that money in order to get into office and stay in office. I believe that right there is the major moral challenge of our generation, because nothing's going to fundamentally change until we deal with that. And that's like whether it's abolition or women's suffrage or civil rights or anything else. Sometimes the American people don't just sit around waiting for a major political party to come up with the new answers. They do it themselves, and then they run people on those issues. And so I think that the two major parties today have a chokehold on the public discourse. And so our public discourse is limited because, well, who will say it for us? And we have to start running candidates saying it ourselves.
Yeah.
And people,
Beautiful.
Congressman Waxman, he's, this will be his 40th year in office. And I'm sorry, I believe that within any system, there is value to institutional memory, but there's also value to new, fresh ideas. And the kind of transformational conversation that you have, that all of us have been involved in for so many years, putting the compassion, if you were talking about compassion before, compassion is a political force. Expecting any status quo candidate, even the best status quo candidate, to have that conversation, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And
Certainly.
so if we want to have that conversation within politics, we're going to have it ourselves.
So we've said on this show many times, there's kind of a crisis of imagination in our world, at least the way I see it. And how I've imagined personally, how I've imagined success, for example, how we've maybe collectively imagined money, all these ways that we hold what's possible in such narrow ways. There's 10 options, right? And I think in terms of politics, it's very interesting because I absolutely fundamentally believe that the status quo is headed towards a breakdown. I mean, the status quo in so many arenas.
It's already breaking down.
Yeah, no question. And so what it takes is someone with enough imagination to present a possibility that's compelling and that people can get excited about, which I haven't been excited about politics in so many years. I can't even, it's so hard to capture the imagination of a collective that is worn down. And it's just gotten worse, right? So I'm curious because this is where, how are you, and I don't know how you're going to do this, how are you going to avoid the pitfall of mudslinging and just the nature of the beast? It feels so much like, how are you going to run a campaign? I just don't even know, Maryanne. How are you going to do this so that you model the being state Barnett was talking about that's possible, where something new can be imagined and can be presented? How are you planning to approach this?
I don't think our spiritual journey is about just doing it where it's easy. I think that in any situation in life, we are challenged to take it to the next step. It's easy, relatively, to be sweet and kind when everybody's sweet and kind to you. So the fact that it is mean and brutal and they'll be coming at me with all kinds of humiliating stories or whatever they make up or whatever in politics, the fact that that is to be expected, in a way, came ultimately to seem to me like the perfect spiritual journey at this point in my life. And so when you ask me, how am I going to do it? By praying continually that God give me a thicker skin, to pray continually, that my reactive mind, that I be given the strength to remember that in my defenselessness my safety lies. If I defend myself, I am attacked. I'm at the effect of nothing but love because only love is real. Is it going to be challenging? Absolutely. But I don't think spiritual journeying and compassion and all of this stuff that we all talk about really means much after a while if we're only practicing those things, as I said before, within our comfort zone.
I could not agree more. That is beautifully expressed. The only book that ever needs to be written about the spiritual journey is that one.
Exactly.
Exactly. It should be embroidered on the pillow of everyone that is near and dear to me. To further to Freeman's point, vis-a-vis your vision, your both practical as well as inspirational vision for a world that can be an America that can be a California that can be a 33rd district that can be. I'm guessing that we can glean some sense of what it holds. You've been involved in the past with Dennis Kucinich and the Peace Room. I'm certain that some of that is component to what your vision is. Would you share a little bit more with our listeners about what they could expect from Maryann in the 33rd District?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, we have a legalized system of corruption in the United States. When money has the kind of undue influence that it now has on our political functioning, you're talking about the dismantling of democracy. This is not something that is coming down the pike. This is something that's happening right now. Mm-hmm. We have transitioned from a government of the people and by the people and for the people, in Lincoln's words, to a government of a few of the people and for a few of the people and by a few of the people. And this is not going to change unless the people themselves demand it. So I wish, as a Congresswoman, to be part of the growing voices, not only within Congress but outside of Congress, to take very seriously in a primary way the upping of the conversation and the behavior that will lead to ridding our political system of the undue influence of money.
The restoration of our freedoms, which are being stripped from us wholesale by the day.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that is correct.
So there's something that comes to mind that one of the challenges, again, that I see is how to create a compelling offer that isn't just pathologizing and seeing where the problems are. In other words,
I'm not finding that difficult, because
Okay.
I speak to what you were talking about before. You were talking about imagination. You were talking about possibility.
Yeah.
It's no different than in any other area.
Yeah.
You know, the whole transformational conversation is, this is the way it is, but we can choose another way.
Yeah.
And that's no less true in politics than in anything else. I mean, do we need to point out that America's food supply is corrupted? Yes, we do. Anything else is denial and fluff. But we can also talk about the steps that it would take to limit the unregulated power of chemical companies and big agriculture to corrupt it. Do we need to point out the horror of the fact that the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world, that we have 2.4 million people imprisoned in the United States compared to 300,000 in the 1970s, that 500,000 of those are nonviolent drug offenders, and that this is a moral scourge in our midst? Yes, we do. But we also want to have the conversation about how to change this and how it can be changed, and how, if we the people are awake and get about the business of healing and repair, that this is transformed.
Yeah.
So any transformational conversation includes an acknowledgement of the darkness. The darkness has to come to light. As the Course in Miracles says, you can't just put the light on the darkness. You have to bring the darkness to light. But you do so within a larger context of possibility
That's the
and
game.
transformation and imagination.
Yeah, there's a quote by a dear friend of this show, Jim Selman, says that when two paradigms collide, it's the paradigm that can absorb the other one that will survive. It's
Well,
the
that's
one that can
profound.
actually, and it's really a matter, from my perspective, of integration, which is the root
Of course.
word of integrity,
Great.
which is really about. And again, I can only, where I become most empowered is when I personalize it. When I want to put it out there, sometimes it becomes a distraction from, how do I own this and how do I respond personally to this? And in that way, I feel like I can relate to it. And I think it starts with compassion. I mean, I don't think that I know that. It's my ability to see it with compassionate eyes that allows me to see it dimensionally and own what aspect of me is being expressed in this shadow play that I'm seeing in the collective experience. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that has to do with an invisible force by which people recognize whether you really mean what you say or whether it's all just talk with you. And
knowing the part of me that's untrustworthy is what makes me trustworthy. So when I find myself scolding and wagging my finger, which I do sometimes, I get on a rant, but my job is to back off that and recognize, wow, what part of me is being reflected that I don't like? Because that's where things get really tricky. Look, if we get into us and them, which is so much what politics is, from my perspective, we've lost in terms of the consciousness that I think you and I both want to promote in the world today. And that's the tricky part.
I don't know. I mean, that is one way of seeing when you say what your work is. I think there's one truth spoken in many different ways and many different techniques. I don't look at it quite the way you did, but I think that's one way of entering the zone of truth. The us versus them, I think a lot of people want to stay away from politics because they want to avoid the us versus them. But remember, there's a difference between us versus them and an honest articulation of differences from an honorable perspective. And I think grown-ups do that. It's just like in an intimate relationship. If you can't fight fair, you can't have real intimacy. You have to have a place where everybody is safe to say, I see this differently than you do.
Yes.
And so I think that's what we need in politics as well. We don't want a situation where nobody ever disagrees. I mean, that's called totalitarianism, where nobody is allowed to have another opinion. But the issue is how to do that from a place of honor and respect, and certainly I'm trying to do that, and part of it has to do with your mentioning the person who is the incumbent right now. It doesn't have to do with demonizing or blaming or criticizing anyone. You can give him the respect he deserves and the appreciation he deserves, and simply begin another conversation.
So in very many ways, very real ways, you are both reaching ahead into a visionary future and also back to the founders of our republic.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. The Asian philosophies speak of the world not as a circle, but as a spiral, that you're taking the eternal principles and just practicing them at higher and higher levels. And absolutely what you said is true. When you spoke earlier about our freedoms being stripped away, I think there are many things happening in our country today which would make the founders, roll over in their graves. Whether you were talking about NSA surveillance and its overreach, whether we're talking about things like the National Defense Authorization Act, whether we're talking about things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, whether we're talking about things like a deregulation of credit swaps that occurred just the other day at the very time when regulating them is what was needed after the economic meltdown. There are many things, many ways in which the entire revolutionary fervor of our independence, which was coded in our first documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and then later also in the Gettysburg Address, where, as I said before, government of the people, by the people, and for the people wouldn't perish. It's perishing now. When so many issues are decided according to the short-term economic interests of a small sector of our society rather than the humanitarian interests that represent the common good, then you have a complete dismantling of democracy on your hands. I also think that the generation and the people within our generation who understand that if you're really going to change something, you have to do more than just fix things on the outside. You have to inquire deeply about what you stand for, like you've been talking about, what about me, what about me? America needs to do that as a nation. How are we doing? Instead of talking about promoting democracy around the world, the country that needs a pro-democracy movement is the United States of America. So we have to do our own inner work as a nation. Do we stand on the principles that we say we stand on? Do we have anything to atone for? Do we have any shadow sides that need to be corrected? Are there places where we as a nation need to make a course correction? Because that's what you've been talking about throughout the show, Barnett, when you were talking about this is where I'm off, and I need to face that, and I need to make a course correction. I think the United States, and we've swerved away from our own better selves as a nation before. I mean, we had slaves, for God's sake, but we have ultimately course corrected. And I think this is time in the United States for a huge course correction. I don't believe it's going to come from the political status quo. It's going to come from a movement within the hearts and among the people of the United States. And I think those of us who understand that kind of thinking and those kinds of principles shouldn't be sitting out that issue. We should be leading the charge.
The American Spring.
Exactly.
And the truth of that is that the whole thing that created the Arab Spring, which, of course, is social media, trumps the big budgets for advertising. I'm not totally
positive. Going back to your issue about adaptability and flexibility.
No, because those mechanisms are slow to adapt. It's very good. It's interesting. Well, look, I'm into this. This is going to be wonderful to watch play out. I mean,
will you come back?
Yeah, we need to.
First of all, I would love to come back, and I'm so grateful to you for, first of all, what you're doing. It's separate from me because I was loved listening to you before I came on. But I so appreciate your having me, and I hope that people who are listening, I hope you yourselves will check out MarianneForCongress.com or Marianne Williamson for Congress.com. And, when you say you'll be watching, do more than watch. Join with me. I mean, if this is to happen, that's part of the adaptability. Others have institutional power. We have people power. But the people power is only operative if the people get involved.
And heart power.
Exactly.
So we on Cutting Edge Consciousness have Marianne Williamson. We will have Marianne Williamson back on the show again before the election. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I thank you in advance for joining us again soon.
Thank you so much, guys. Much love to you.
Thank you. Love to
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
And for those of you listening, stay tuned because we'll be right back to wrap up after these messages here on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here.
Good moment with Barnett Bain.
That was great.
Yes, that was... so there is so much food for thought there. I will be chewing for quite some time.
Yeah. It's a different. I mean, look, I sort of have been of the mind that something new had to emerge
across the board
because the system is so broken. I mean, it goes back to the Buckminster Fuller quote, where instead of railing against a system that doesn't work, create a new system that makes it obsolete. And I think that becomes a really important distinction. It isn't to say, as Marianne was putting it, that we don't recognize all the ways that things are off the track. But I think just as important, and I think you noted this, is what's the vision of possibility that's compelling enough that people can get excited? Because we start thinking about all of the challenges, and it can get overwhelming. And then the fear drives the dialogue, which is what I believe I see in all of this positioning. That's all fear-related stuff. That's not anyone coming from a place of that sort of visionary leadership that I can get excited about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Less than 20-second answer. That's great.
I see that the entrenched structures, political and otherwise,
Correct.
are held in place by fear.
Definitely.
Marianne points out, and I don't think anybody would argue the point, that our liberties and our freedoms are being eroded. We have secret courts now. And so there is nothing American about these ideas and about the way that our liberties are being eroded. And they're being eroded because they're being traded for the promise of safety. I will keep you safe, but you have to become a child. You have to surrender. You have to surrender your fundamental rights and freedoms in order for us to keep you safe. And at some point, there will be those who are listening right now who are going to argue with why that has to be done. And I'm not here to make an argument one way or another. I'm making an observation that is the cost of that magnitude of freedom, which is greater and greater control. The cost of that magnitude of quote-unquote safety is greater and greater controls on our liberties and on our fundamental freedoms, and what creates an environment for possibility, for wide-ranging imagination, for connection, for vulnerability, for transparency, for honesty. When I find out that the President of the United States has access to every communication and every transaction, the notion that there is such a thing as boundaries and privacy, that's no longer the case. That's just not true. That is a fantasy of a bygone era. And so it's very clear that there is a new ownership that has yet to be embraced about what we have come to as a nation, a recognition, an acknowledgement. And then out of that, we can decide, is this who we want to be?
Right.
And we are not quite there yet. I hear that Marianne wants to bring us there, and for that I am very grateful.
Yeah. Again, I think the challenge is going to be to craft a compelling offer that, because again, it's one of those things where when we're just pathologizing, when we're just seeing all the problems, it misses the opportunity to present the vision that would be something, again, I think that's big enough to handle the problems rather than, again, going back into the pathology and sort of pounding it out. That's my perspective. That's where and Marianne, rightfully said we may disagree on that, and we might. But it's, I mean, and I don't know if we disagree. I mean, really, I just see it as a challenge, so.
You can't, I think it was Jean Houston who said on this show, we can either pathologize or re-mythologize. And what is being birthed here in the moment is an entirely new mythology. It is not a better version, a new and improved version of what was. It is something that is a virgin. It's a whole new dance floor that we are boogie-woogieing on. And so I salute Marianne for dancing, for being a dancer.
We need a better dance than the boogie woogie. That was a bad idea back in 1979. Barnett, you aged yourself.
Probably the last time I danced. Well,
That's
I did
not
go.
true.
I went to the Frug for a while.
I've seen you dance.
You have it.
Yeah. Oh.
So
and it's something like the boogie woogie.
It's about it's about
bad,
the
it's just
cha-cha-cha,
old.
right? So it is about being willing to step out, as Marianne said. You at some point you do your inner work, and then you take your inner work out into the outer world. The world is now our hermitage, and you bring it out there. And in that way, we are dropping breadcrumbs. We are forging a path that we're either first to be second, or second to be second, or third to be second, or we are forging something virgin and brand new. And that is that can be confrontive. That can be scary. We can hear the voices of our resistances, and we can hear the voices of our resistances inside ourselves and being expressed by those around us and in the public, and at the same time, that is the path of innovation.
Yeah.
So what is it going to look like? We don't know.
We don't know. That's the comfort with the discomfort, or the understanding that uncertainty is part of is in the mix.
You don't always have to have a clear idea of what it is going to look like, because if you have a clear idea, you can be certain of one thing. You are threading back to the past for a clear idea. Anything that is innovative is received as an inspiration. It is a gift from the more of who we are.
That's it. So we know there's certain things that are fulfilling and gratifying, things like compassion, freedom that we aspire to, and then the path to it, who knows? One of the things you said, and I want to harken back to, because it was actually something where you and Marianne, though I know because I can kind of see where both you are coming from, where the two of them are going to meet, and this has to do with the being state and the doing state, and it even suggests what you just said about sort of we do our inner work and then we take it out in the world, and this is where I think there's a stumbling block. I don't think it's that clean. In other words, or linear. I don't think we do our inner work and then we go do something with it. I think it's all inner work. I think that the entire play of what we're doing in our actions and then in our assessment of that is inner work. As you know, I was Jesuit educated, and the great line is that they're contemplatives in action. But the contemplative and action piece is that the balance of those is so magnificent that there's this constant coming back to, or regrounding in, what does this mean for me? Because I do think it's a personal thing. I think it's all an inside job, and so it's going to be very interesting to see Marianne balance the action she's in and how she's grounding herself and where she's taking stock of what lessons are being reflected for her. And then as we watch this play out, for me, heck, I'm interested in seeing how all of this is presented, how it's received. I'm curious to see what dust it evokes.
Well, she's not separate from you, and she's not separate from me.
That's it.
So the degree to watch that, it's like being asleep in your bed and having a dream, and you move through that dream inside your little skin suit as one character in the dream, and there are other people in the dream. And then you wake up and you realize, wow, you dreamed every single character and everything. So you dreamed the whole world.
Yeah.
So you are both separated and the whole simultaneously. And when we wake and we remember back our dreams, that is clearer. Well, what if? I'm not making statements. I certainly don't know. But what if? What if that points to a larger truth than what goes on with everyone in my reality, with anyone that I give attention to, wherever I direct attention, it signifies what matters to me. And so what goes on with Marianne's candidacy, I'll watch with great interest, because it is a mirror of many of the themes that are important to me. And she's doing the heavy lifting in certain areas of pioneering and exploration. And so are some of the less savory characters in our world. They are
also me.
They are also. So I
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah.
divorce myself
No.
from any of it. If to the point about being states, what is the relationship of a being state and a doing state? I don't know. I've been doing a great deal of thinking about it recently. If I turn my oven up to 420 degrees, I can cook a chicken, but I can't cook ice cream. At minus 32 degrees, I can make ice cream and keep ice cream, but I can't cook a chicken. So I think that metaphor has its limits, but at 32 degrees, I cannot be in an environment of nurturing and creating safety and opportunity and freedoms for all if that 32 degrees is a fear state. At 420, I cannot fire up the panic button in quite the same way. And those are internal states. I'm not intimate enough with the idea that I'm sharing now to speak more about it at this point, but it's something that's cooking. There is a very intimate relationship with the being state of stillness and a possibility and a frequency, and what can be created inside that being state. As I think there is some wise cliche is, before enlightenment you chop wood and you carry water, and after enlightenment you chop wood and carry water. But one is at 32 degrees and one's at 420.
Yeah, you do it differently.
You do it differently, and the world is different. It's a totally different place.
So, well, I think it's an upgrade in operating system. So the contemplative practices and this contemplative in action is more grounded, again, in the qualities that are ultimately what we're going for, which is freedom and connection and peace and collaboration is a more effective operating system than competition. It doesn't mean there isn't a place for healthy competition. There is. Again, collaboration can, I think, as a paradigm, hold some elements of healthy competition and help diffuse the unhealthy competition and which we see in some of the dominance and control and the bullying in the world today. So look, I'm up to being a more compassionate human being. I'm up to collaborating more in my life.
What does that mean?
So for me, it's moment to moment.
Well, what does it mean? Not how. What does it mean to be a more compassionate person?
Quick with compassion. My reactive system internally is defensive. It's a survival mechanism. It's survivalism. I'm not interested in being in survival. I know when I'm going there, but the consciousness is the ability to interrupt that pattern. So I'm not in my reactive mind. More and more, there is the space between stimulus and response. There is the ability to choose. There is the ability to navigate the choppy waters versus just get in the fray, right? And this is going to be the challenge.
Which is where most of our world is operating.
That's what I'm saying.
And some of our world is operating in a feeling state and has a different quality than this sort of the chattering, hyper-frenzied thinking and strategizing and figuring it out.
Yeah.
There is a disconnect from an embodied being state, from a more natural, from the state of the natural world. Not that it's an either or, but it is that body intelligence supersedes the head trip.
Yeah.
I'm not terribly intimate with it. I'm exploring it, but I do know that I am not going to solve anything by trying to figure it out. I am as bright a light as anybody around. It's not hubris, and I know that it worked really well this far, but it's not going to work anymore. It's just a jitterbug.
It is.
There is a more expansive and an entirely different set of responses to the world that I am not familiar or intimate with yet, but I am discovering. And that is not figuring things out.
Dropping in, dancing more, and finding, because dance, the problem is also, you brought up Jean Houston, and she said, the dancing, the problem, that was another way.
That's an embodied communion
of relating
with
to challenges.
of a world of matter not a world of thought forms where I'm going to compete my thought form for supremacy with your thought form,
right.
however softly spoken it is.
That's right. We come to the end of the show, folks. Listen, it was a gas, Barnett, to have Marianne Williamson on the show. It was a joy, and it's fun to...
She'll be back.
Yeah, she'll be back, and it's fun to continue the dialogue. So we will pick up next week, and we invite you to come back next week and join us again here on Cutting Edge Consciousness.